Welcome, 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 everybody. I'm so delighted you're here. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Karen Fleshman, founder of the Interracial Sisterhood Coalition, here to talk about the power of interracial sisterhood with author and social psychologist Evelyn Carter. Dr. Evelyn Carter, thank you so much for joining us, Evelyn.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen. It's really fantastic to be here.
Yes, yes. And please share a little bit about yourself, your background, how you came to write this book.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I am Evelyn Carter, Dr. Evelyn Carter. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and as you mentioned, I'm a social psychologist. And social psychology is really the study of how the identities that we hold influence how we interact with others in the world, basically. And so I have always been really fascinated by kind of the way that social psychology and social science in general can answer some of our society's like biggest, hardest questions. And I have always been fascinated by research on kind of this like gap in how people from different racial and ethnic groups see the world. And so this my first ever publication was actually on what we called group-based differences in bias detection. So basically, if you're a white person, how do you think racism shows up? If you're a person of color, how do you think it shows up? And why are those things so widely disparate? And what do we do about it? And over the last 15 or so years of my career, I have been really, really passionate about figuring out how to close that gap. And as much as I love talking about research and doing one-on-one advising with my executive clients and things like that, I have found that writing a book scales far faster than almost anything else that I could do, except for maybe a TED Talk. And so writing this book as a way to make the research that I and other folks have done accessible and to bring it to as many people as possible to help change the world is really what inspired me to do this work. So that's who I am. I'm a social psychologist. I'm a researcher. I love data. And also because it is incredibly important to my identity, I also should share that I'm a mom of two. I am a toddler mom. I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, which is not only relevant to kind of the way that my life goes, but it's also relevant to exactly how much sleep I did not get last night.
Well, despite all of that, you seem very fresh and full of energy. So we're so glad you're here. And I encourage everyone to purchase this book. It is absolutely brilliant. It really breaks it down so simply, what racism is, how to detect it, and what to do differently. And there's just no excuse, y'all. We can all read this. We can all do better.
I love it. You heard it here first. Get the book. I
One of
also
the
have to
things.
say it's
Mm,
available. So someone, I posted a video on TikTok and I was like, get my book, whatever. And somebody said, I'm putting it on my to be read list for my next paydays. And I was like, okay, well, maybe don't spend your like hard-earned cash. If you got to wait till payday to buy my book, like just please buy other things. But it's also available at libraries. I learned that there is a 16-week waiting period for my book on Libby at one of the libraries. Somebody told me, they're like, ooh, that means you're legit. So you can borrow it, you can buy it, you can stream it on audiobook, whatever you want.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little cough situation.
It's all good.
I, I would like you, one of the things I love about the book is your storytelling. And you start chapter 4. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's all good.
You start chapter 4 with a very relatable story.
Hmm.
Could you share what chapter 4 is about and
Yeah.
the story?
Yeah, so chapter 4 is called White is a Racial Identity. And the reason that I wrote this chapter in particular is that when I'm working with folks who want to understand how to detect racial bias, how to detect racism, I think it's really important for them to understand that yes, race is a social construct, which means, right, it's this thing that we have created and labeled in a particular way in the United States, and that those labels are actually different depending on other countries or regions that you go to. Um, but because it's a social contract does not mean that it doesn't have meaning and that there are not decisions and real implications of the labels that we ascribe to folks. But because of all of this kind of conversation about race and racism, what I've seen in research, what I've experienced in my life as a Black woman is that race is often something that is put on other people who are not members of the default racial group in society, white folks, right? So everybody else has a race except for white folks who get to just be. And that's not cool. It's also not accurate because white is a race that has a ton of experiences, identity, advantages and disadvantages, and advantages associated with it. And so helping white folks to understand that they are not kind of this identity-less folks floating around in an orb, but rather that their race is white and that that has meaning is really important. Now, one of the reasons that white people often don't realize that they have a race is because white is in many places the default kind of group that is devised when, or that is put in mind when a space is created. And so, as an example of this, in my book, I talk about a story from my time when I was in undergrad. I'm a proud Northwestern Wildcat, and I was actually a tour guide. So your comment about, kind of my general kind of joy and whatnot comes probably from the fact that I have a performance-based background, and we know how to turn it on. And so I was a tour guide, and I was talking with one of my fellow tour guides who was a young white woman from a suburb of Minneapolis. And she said to me, Evelyn, my hometown was just named as one of the best places to live in the United States. And I knew where she was from. I knew exactly the suburb from Minneapolis that she was from. And I was like, there is no way in the world that that is the best place to live. First of all, I'd never heard of it before I met you. Second of all, no. And she was like, no, like seriously. And she pulled it up, and it was this like national publication that had this list of the best cities to live. And she showed that her city did indeed actually top the list. It was like the number one best place to live. And I tell the story in the book, but basically what happened is she was showing me the list. I was like, oh, this is a list of the best cities for white people to live in. And like, I mean, the color that like existed drained from her face entirely. She was like, no. And we had a conversation. I said to her, I was like, listen, there is no way that I would be comfortable or welcome in your city in such a way that would make it feel like it was the best place to live. And I was like, in fact, if you were to look at the list of the best cities for people who look like me, for Black people to live in, you would find, I am certain, a very different list. And she listened. We pulled up a browser tab and I typed in best places, best cities to live in the United States for Black people. And of course, the list was very different than the one that she had shown me, and her city did not show up on there at all. And what followed was then a conversation about how, that list that she was looking at talked about, like community spirit and like the presence of parks and all that kind of stuff. And what I said to her and what these lists demonstrated is that like, those are all nice to have, but the minimum threshold that we are looking for as people of color is not this question of like, are there going to be enough parks? It's, am I going to be safe here? And safety often is indicated by having a presence of people who look like me in a variety of neighborhoods, who are working and owning businesses in the community, right? Like our presence being there and being fully integrated into the city is usually a sign that we are welcome. And her city did not have that. Her town did not have that. And so while I really enjoyed that conversation, one of the reasons that I opened my book with it is that because she had never thought before that discussion that her experience as a young white woman living in a suburb of Minneapolis was not representative of what everybody else would experience. And that was also not the case for people who were creating that list to begin with, right? Because they should have realized, like, diversity representation matters. I actually did go back when I was writing the chapter to look at the methodology of that list, and they excluded cities that had 95% or more white folks. But I think that that person's city had like 90% was like 90% white or something like that. So like still not very diverse, right? But anyway, yeah, under helping white people understand that just because you don't think about your white identity every day does not mean that it does not exist. And in fact, the reason you likely don't think about your whiteness is because the world was curated for you. You've got lists telling you exactly where you can live without consideration of the fact that there's nobody there who doesn't look like you, who doesn't think like you. And that's maybe ideal for you, but it ain't safe for us.
And it was all done very deliberately by design. So
Yes.
I grew up in a community that was almost entirely white. I never questioned that. It just seemed normal, right? But as I've grown older and started to unpack the history of my community, it had been a sundown town.
Mm,
So up until the late 1960s, early 70s, there was a billboard on the outskirts of town that said, "Welcome to Loveland, Colorado, a great place to raise a family." And underneath it was a handwritten sign that said, "We practice Jim Crow laws here."
great.
So, after the Housing Rights Act passed, et
Mm,
cetera, they had to take that billboard down. But the culture of the community, the
mhm,
residential patterns was
uh-huh.
established. So by the time I was growing up there, it was a hotbed of the John Birch Society, which is
Mm.
like the northern branch of the Ku Klux Klan. And who's going to be the first family of color to be like, oh, this seems like a really good place to raise
This
a
is what I'm
family?
saying.
Why don't we?
Yes.
So
It's
once,
interesting. Go ahead,
oh,
sorry.
no, sorry. Once it's established, it does not change.
Yep. Yeah. And so it's funny you were bringing this up. I was just looking because I want to make sure I get this right. But so I live in Long Beach, California, and like shout out to Long Beach. It's fantastic. We moved here from LA, and I am never going back. But nearby Long Beach is a little city called Lakewood that actually. So I didn't know a ton about Lakewood until until I moved down to Long Beach, and I was driving around Lakewood one day and I saw a banner that said the town motto. And the town motto of Lakewood is times change, values don't.
Mm.
And so for me, right, I saw that and I was like, well, that feels ominous and weird. And then I went in to learn more about Lakewood and found out that it was one of the places that was built as a redlined community to keep folks of color, to keep Black folks in particular out. Um, and it's interesting now because Lakewood is a very, I believe, as certainly as I've been there, racially diverse area. And but and as I think about just that motto, times change, values don't. It really brings to mind exactly what you're talking about. That like there are people who live on my street in Long Beach who have been in their house and they are since they were born. They're 75 years old now. They've seen some things about the evolution of Lakewood, the town just next door. And I'm pretty sure that the people, if there are people who are 70 or so living on my street who have been here since they've been born, there are people in Lakewood who are the same, who are probably holding on to the values that haven't changed. And it is just a remarkable thing to think about. And I also think it's really important to talk about this because I'm in Southern California, right? People often, when you're talking about racism, when you're talking about systemic racism, I think it's easy to say, like, oh, well, that's something that happens in the South and all of that. But, you're over there in Colorado talking about a handwritten sign that says, we practice Jim Crow here. Like, what a wild thing to be proud of. But yeah, that's something that is embedded within the community, I'm sure. And it has lots of implications for how safe people um, who are not white feel there, I am sure. And even quite frankly, probably people who are white but have other kinds of marginalized identities.
And then you quote someone who I personally um am extremely angry at, uh, John Roberts. the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he's talking about a school district that
Hmm.
is trying to desegregate, and a group of parents sue the school district, and what share what the Supreme Court decided in that case.
Well, yes. So the case I'm looking for my book. Oh, it's on the floor because it fell. I'm looking for my book because Lord knows I'm going to remember the big details of this, but not the small ones. But basically, this was a case where the court was trying to rule about how race could be used to help shape the demographics of a district, right? And it really was a case about like, should the schools be representative of the districts that they serve? And what the district had decided was that the answer was yes. And so what that meant is that if the demographics of the school did not align with the district, then race could be the like tie-breaking factor for students who were admitted. And the Chief Justice didn't like that. Let's see. And the case was parents, I found it in my footnotes, parents involved in community schools versus the Seattle school district number 1. And that was in 2007. Um, and so I think and we're seeing lots of this happen now, this idea that the Supreme Court and just people in general are trying to make us think that by talking about race, by talking about the legacy of racism, and by trying to put in act efforts to combat the inequity that is a result of the history of racism, that's racist against white people, which, as I say at the introduction of my book, racism against white people doesn't exist, right? It's not a thing. But yeah, that's one of that case, again, in Seattle, is a perfect example of how the efforts that are in place to try to reverse the course of racism are being deemed racist. And really, it's because those efforts were not centering whiteness and were not centering white folks. And Chief Justice didn't like that.
And here we are in the week of the Calais versus Louisiana decision, in
Yep.
which the plaintiffs identified themselves as non-African American voters. Like, that
Yep.
just when I read those words, I'm like, basically what you're saying is I couldn't possibly be represented by an African American because I can only be represented by a white person because my only interest is as a white person. And then the fact that they didn't even
Yep.
put their names, like, okay, that's what you believe, put your name there. You should be proud of it. Instead, they
Yep.
identified
Yeah.
themselves as non-African American voters. Just that really got under my skin. And now we see across the entire South, they are redistricting everything to
Yep.
eliminate any districts with a majority Black population that ensures that the Black people of the South, where the majority of Black people in the United States live, are actually represented at both the congressional level and in the state
Yeah.
legislatures.
Yeah. It's very distressing. And I was talking to someone recently, a couple days ago, who basically said, how distressing it was. Um, and the thing that I kept that we were, thinking about is what is the long-term impact of this? And I live in California. It's something that I've even been like grappling with, right? Like there's the saying of, like you can't I'm gonna butcher it, but the end of the saying is something about the master with you can't do whatever it is with the master's tools.
You can't
And in
dismantle the master's house with the master's
Thank
tools.
you. See,
Yep,
look at
yep.
you. You were like always full of the quotes and the things, right?
No,
And so
Audre Lorde is my yes, she is
yes.
my patron saint. I am
I should have known. Like, of course, I know this. I know how much you love Audre Lorde, so I should have known that you would have that at the tip of your tongue. Um, but so, in California, we had Proposition 50, which basically was voting to allow there to be redrawn maps for California, specifically for the 2026 election, so that basically we could combat the gerrymandering that was happening in Texas. And on the one hand, I was like, yeah, we got to do something, but also, is is this the way? And I think the thing that is a struggle for me right now as a person who is a sentient being living in the United States who just cares about equity is that there are so many things that are happening that are the result of white supremacy, and our attempts to dismantle it, and then white supremacy rearing its ugly head and be like, nah, not today. That happen, that I just wonder, like, how are we supposed to fight all of these battles? And I often feel very disheartened by things like the Calais decision, and even, like Prop 50 in California needing to be a thing. And then I think about the individual impact that we all have. And I am, for example, very fortunate to have built an incredible community of people around me. And the thing that I have seen over the past couple of years is that as the world just continues to boil, and as our highest levels of government continue to disenfranchise folks and really dismantle the efforts that have been put in place to combat the racist foundation of this country, um, I am leaning more into my local community. I am leaning more into the connections that I have with individuals who are using their voice for change. And that is where I find optimism. Um, because otherwise it would be like, what are we supposed to do? And so, the thing that's, I think, is interesting is I wrote my book in a very different political time, but I also wasn't sure what the climate was going to be like when I published it. And writing a book about racism and publishing a book that talks very clearly and plainly about racism in this kind of environment has been challenging. And I still feel optimistic because people like you slide into my DMs on LinkedIn and are like, "Hey, let's have a conversation." And then we get to bring folks together to talk about it, things like this. So there's a lot that I think exists you know, that we should be concerned about, and that could make us, and does make me, feel angry and disheartened. And there's good that's happening. And this conversation is my reminder of what that good can look like.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's my reminder too. And you also quote a study in chapter 4 that I talk about all the time.
Ooh,
A
great.
research a research study that shows that on average, white American social networks are
Ugh,
90% white, and
yeah.
two-thirds of white Americans' social networks are 100% white, which is a natural and logical outgrowth of the kind of residential and
Yep.
educational segregation policies that we were just talking about, right? If you live in an all-white neighborhood and go to an all-white school, turns
Yep.
out most of your friends are gonna be white, and
Yep.
you have to be very intentional to break out of that. What would you say are the challenges associated with having an all-white social circle? And I also want to, share this comment, oh, yes, Chrissy from Texas shared, "I was almost turned away from voting, and if it hadn't been for the lone poll agent upholding the law, they would have turned me away."
Yep.
I'm telling you, everybody, we got to sign up to be involved in the election, to be poll workers, to be poll observers, to do get out the vote. Like literally, mark your calendars. Here in California, our primary is June 2nd. Of course, we have mail-in voting in advance of that, and for the November election, go and be involved in the election, because I'm telling you, we are in a civil war right now, and it's going to be like this, I would say, through 2028. Like, we have to get involved in the
Yep.
election. But anyway, I don't wanna
Yeah.
go down
I
that
know,
path.
like a little listen, so the thing that I think is fascinating about even just this conversation, right? Like when I talk to folks about racism, whether I'm doing corporate workshops or whatnot, I can sometimes see, especially for white folks that like have not thought about racism really or experienced it in the depth that folks in my community have. I can see them kind of be like, is everything racism? Like everything? And so the answer is yes, number one. But what I appreciate about this conversation is that it is absolutely related to our conversation about how to combat racism to talk about voting rights, right, and ways to get involved to make sure that voting the rights of people's vote to vote is not disenfranchised, because that is also tied to racism and white supremacy. So anyway, I loved your little commercial for the election, and also it's totally relevant. You asked me a question before we went on to that about
Oh, white people's social networks being
yeah.
90% white.
Yeah. So the biggest reason or the biggest concern or issue with having this entirely homogenous friendship network is that you miss out on experiences that you wouldn't otherwise have or know, because our reality is not the only reality that exists. Now, Karen, something that I do in my book and in workshops that I lead and any conversation that I have about racism, because that I know it can be a very challenging topic to bring up, because I'm not just talking about this kind of like thing that exists out there in the world. I'm talking about something that touches our lives on a daily basis, either in that we are perpetuating racism or we are experiencing it, or maybe both at the same time. And it has a lot of moral stuff wrapped up in there as well. And so this is not kind of an objective conversation that anybody is having. And so sometimes what I find is that it's easier to have a conversation about racism by talking about something else entirely. So I'm going to do that now. I used to fly on planes all the time when I was a consultant. It was like my favorite thing to do. I would go to LAX. I used to love flying out of LAX. It's trash now. Maybe it always was trash, but it's extra trash now. But I used to love flying out of LAX. I would be at Terminal 4, which is American Airlines. I would go to Dunkin' Donuts. I would get my French vanilla swirl coffee. I would get a Cosmopolitan magazine. I would get a Smart Water. The little goldfish on the inside of the bottle made me smile every time, and they got rid of it. It was very sad. And I would be good to go. I would get to the plane. I would board. Not an issue. I loved flying and never thought that anybody would have a different experience until I read an article that was called Flying While Fat. And the
Mm.
person who wrote that article described a very different experience. She said for her, flying was like torture, the worst thing ever, because it started with figuring out what airline am I going to book on and what is their policy for quote unquote customers of size. And often it meant that she had to book two seats next to each other. Then when she got to the airport, it was a whole other ordeal to get to the gate, right? To go through security, to have her body examined, usually extra because of bias and fat phobia, have people looking at her, right? She didn't feel comfortable ever. And then when she boarded the plane, feeling people's eyes on her, being like, oh God, I hope she's not going to be by me. Or realizing that the two seats that she booked next to each other got split up, because that's just what airlines do these days, right? All of these things were related to her identity as a fat woman, and her experience traveling on a plane was very different from mine as a thin woman traveling on a plane. Now, in my book, I tell this story, and what I also say is the sad realization that it took reading an article for me to understand not just what somebody else's experience on a plane might be like, but that it took reading an article to understand that my body type as a thin, quite petite young woman is a privilege to inhabit. And that is a privilege because the world is built for me. Maybe not my height. I'm 5'2.5". The world is built for tall people. I'm convinced of this. But it is certainly built for people who are small, and especially women who are small. And the reason that it took an article to realize this is because I didn't have any fat friends in my life at all. And that is what is wrong with white people only having white friends. If you don't have people from a variety of backgrounds, identities, and experiences, you're not going to know about what the analogous flying while fat experience that we have is. But it's not just that if you don't have a diverse group of friends, you miss out on knowing about the negative experiences. You also miss out on the fun. So, for example, my daughter goes to a school that is fantastic at celebrating diversity. And this past February for Lunar New Year, they had there are a number of parents who celebrate in a variety of ways, and so they got together this like coalition of parents who came into the school. One parent did a craft making paper lanterns with one class, another brought in dumplings, and they literally filled their own dumplings and fried them in the pan in the classroom, right? Thankfully there was adult supervision and all of that. Another classroom read a book and handed out red envelopes and taught them to say, saying, I don't remember what it was, when they were getting their present, right? That is what you miss out on. My daughter, who is a Black African American daughter of two Black African American parents, is not going to at home experience Lunar New Year in that real, authentic way were it not for the diversity of our network and the intentional effort we put into curating that for her. So you miss out on our perspective, not just the prejudice and discrimination we face, but you miss out on the joy. You miss out on the pride. And that means that your life is really sad, honestly. Like you're missing out.
I agree with that 100%. This is exactly why I created the Interracial Sisterhood
Yes.
Coalition, because I live here in the Bay Area, right? A majority, global majority region in a majority, global majority state. Yet 9 times out of 10, when a white friend invites me to something, almost everybody there is white. And when a black friend invites me to something, I'm one of maybe 2 white people who are there. And I'm like, this is terrible. Like, we need to have a place where we all get together and meet each other. And it has to be outside of the workplace. And it
Yep.
has to be an opt in space. Like, no one's forced to
Mm.
be there. But if you are open to having meaningful conversations across difference, and you are um willing to try, the rewards, like, I cannot tell you how grateful I am to have such a diverse group of friends. Also, the positive influence it's had on my kids to
Yeah.
have different people over for dinner, house guests in our home, travel to visit people. They've just had such a different upbringing from what I've had, and including going to very diverse public schools and all of that. Just such a rich, culturally rich
Yeah.
upbringing. And I would also say it's very harmful to people of color that white people are exclusively associating with other white people, because that means white people are exclusively sharing our social capital,
Yeah.
whether that's job opportunities, investment,
Yep.
it's where to send your kid to school, places to go on vacation, new restaurants to try out, whatever. We are solely exchanging that with other white people. That
Yep.
is driving and maintaining the racial wealth gap.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. And all of that is true. And the other issue with the way that people of color are harmed when white people just continue to interact with white people is that eventually you are going to encounter a person who is not white. And we will be able to tell almost instantly how uncomfortable you are. And this is also something that I talk about in my book. So I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner. I lead workshops, I consult with companies, I consult with executives, I help people build organizations that work for everyone, not just one group, right? But really thinking about organizations and what it takes to make an organization that works for everybody, especially those from marginalized identities. And one of the things that was very popular among DEI practitioners and, non-practitioners and whatnot was to talk about the benefits of diversity, right? Like diversity makes you smarter, you're more creative, all those different kinds of things. I've also been, guilty of talking about this. when I was doing research for my book, I was reminded of some research that I heard in a presentation by Dr. Kanishiwa Hurd and Vicky Plout, where they actually challenge the notion of the benefits of diversity ideology, because they say the framing of it is one that centers white people.
Mm,
And basically, their point is when we talk about diversity benefiting others, who is really benefiting from it?
mm,
Who is actually benefiting from the enhanced thinking that comes from having people from different backgrounds? Who is actually benefiting from the bottom line, and how is that benefit coming to place? And what they challenged me and everybody to consider is that the way that it is currently framed is such that white people who do not have racial diversity are the only beneficiaries of it, because we actually don't know if I, as a Black woman, am really going to experience benefits of diversity if I go into a space where I am, quote unquote, the diversity, right? If I'm the
mm.
only chocolate chip in a sea of vanilla, does that really benefit me? I don't know. And that's something that I have really challenged myself to think about a lot. It's that when we're creating these spaces where we're trying to bring people from different backgrounds together, how do we make sure that we are not bringing folks of color into a space where all they are going to do is be privy to harm from white folks who see them as being there for the benefit of their own education
Mm.
and awareness? And so, something that I appreciate about what you are doing is creating a space where it really is about bringing together community, not for the sake of helping to open the eyes of white folks who might not find diversity elsewhere, but really bringing people together in an opt-in way that says, this is something that we care about, and we want to build community and connection in a genuine manner. So, yeah, the benefits of diversity kind of like thing blew my mind when I heard it the first time. And it's something that I really think about, like, who is benefiting here? And if it's not a mutually beneficial experience, then all we've done is create yet another way for white people to continue to do harm as the result of racism for folks of color. And that's not a space that we need to keep creating.
And everything you're saying right now is the reason why I got into DEI. The reason
Mm.
why, I come from a youth workforce development background. So I was preparing young adults of color to enter the corporate workforce. And I thought I was, quote, helping them, only to hear from them about the experiences that they were having, and I realized, "Oh my god, we are spending so much time and energy, quote, preparing these young
Mm.
adults to go into these environments. We are spending absolutely 0 time and energy preparing these environments for these
Yes.
young
Oh,
adults.
yes.
So, of
Yes.
course, they're not having a positive
Yep.
experience." And
Yep.
that's when I was like, I need to shift the whole focus of my work to transform the workplace. And as you were talking, I was also reflecting on what we know happened in 2025 with more than 600,000 Black women
Mm.
pushed out of the workforce by their employers. And I heard the Black woman sociologist Tressie McMillan Cottom say that white men came for Black women's jobs as a punishment for radicalizing white women.
Yeah. Dr. Cotton,
So,
she's amazing. She drops some truth bomb. She's incredible. Um,
yes, I
yeah.
love her so, so very much. So as because we've been going here for a while
I
here,
know.
so
Listen, we could talk all day.
we could talk all day. Let's come back to the theme then of the power of interracial sisterhood.
Yeah.
What how would you define interracial sisterhood, or what does that, when we say those words, what does that mean to you?
To me, interracial sisterhood turns on a like deep understanding of intersectionality. So intersectionality is a concept phrase that was first kind of introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a professor at UCLA School of Law. Um, and basically it drew from her analysis of the legal scholarship, finding that within the law, there are like class action suits you can file based upon race. There are class action suits you can file based upon gender, but that people who kind of are at the intersection of race and gender, particularly Black women, which is what was really kind of initially the focus of this analysis, occupy an intersectional space that carries extra challenges from a legal setting, right? Like a Black woman, we aren't like a case in or a class, excuse me, in law in the same way that Black men who are reflective of like the male and white women who are reflective of gender are. And so this concept of intersectionality has been expanded to basically be like, when you've got a variety, a combination of marginalized identities in particular, there are unique circumstances that arise that aren't there if you just look at whatever the singular identities are. And so when I think about interracial sisterhood, I think about people who deeply understand the way that our shared identity as women, as sisters, connects us, and who also understand that our distinct identities within that, based upon our racial and ethnic identities, are different, and that the experiences that we have as a result of those are different, and that an interracial sisterhood is a place where people understand both things that are the same among us, the things that are different among us, and work together to make sure that all of us, with our unique experiences and circumstances, feel included, valued, and supported, and like others have your back. That's what I think of when I
Mm.
think of interracial sisterhood.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and I would say from a white woman perspective, um, I've experienced sexual harassment, glass ceiling, uh, uh, wage gap from white men in the workplace. But by far, the most psychologically harmful behavior I experienced in the workplace came from white women who perceive me as a threat to their proximity to the white men in positions of power. They would kind of approach me friendly, like being a mentor, and then they would take things that I shared with them in confidence and use it to undermine me in ways that were just blew my mind, you know,
Mm,
because I went to Mount Holyoke College. I come from like women's solidarity
yeah.
mentality, right? And so I was unprepared to see women be that way in the workplace. And I don't know if you saw, the British Journal of Social Psychology just released a study that documents that men prefer to hire women in executive positions who maintain the status quo.
Oh
They
yeah.
they don't want to see no
Yeah.
disruptors in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, in contrast, I had a very unusual work history in that I've almost entirely everyone I've reported up to have been women of color. Almost all of the people I've reported to, and almost all the organizations I worked for were majority people of the global majority organizations, and the people we served were also people of the global majority. So I had to figure out, how do I, as a white woman, show up in these spaces? And not only that, as a white woman who grew up in an almost entirely white community, much like your fellow tour guide there from Minnesota. Now in, I'm working for a city of New York city agency of 400 very diverse people, managing a team. So I'm so lucky that I had women of color who were amazing mentors and role models from whom I learned so much about how do you learn how to relate across difference as equals, and not only that, but as an authority, as a leader in the
Mhm.
workplace, to earn the respect of the people who work for you, and of your colleagues, and the people higher than you in the hierarchy. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
lot. It is a lot.
No, I mean, so I really love learning from people who are kind of drawing on their experiences to make this world a better place. And Carla Monterosso is one of those people. She was the CEO of Code 2040, which was a group, organization that existed to help Black and Brown folks place in roles in tech companies. Um, and one of the things that I learned in conversation with Carla is she talks a lot about how the rules of engagement and how power is used are very different if you are in a multiracial, multicultural organization compared to if you are in a homogenous organization. And so, homogenous organizations, right, mostly white, mostly male, what have you, are ones where there's this very hierarchical orientation to power. And so, everybody is basically fighting to get power, keep power, and there's a lot of, like, whatnot. And that brings its own sets of challenges. And what she notes from her research and her work with various corporations and organizations of all shapes and sizes is that multiracial, multicultural organizations have to create a different orientation to power and hierarchy because of the variety of backgrounds and experiences that are there. And so, something that I really take solace in is an understanding that the way that the white male dominated workplaces are built is and the orientation to power that exists there is not one that is set up to cultivate community. And as somebody who thrives in community, that then brings the question, like, is it okay that I don't want to sit with them because I don't want to be over there doing that anyway, right? And so I think there's a lot of sadness that I feel when I think about the 600,000 plus, because it's way more than that now, Black women who have been pushed out. And I think that Dr. Cottom's um, point about this being payback is absolutely right. But again, I find optimism in that this is kind of how things always go. So there is a book written by Dr. Carol Anderson called White Rage that
Mm.
talks about historically how every period of racial progress is met with swift and decisive backlash from white people as a way to kind of revert power back to quote unquote where it belongs. And she goes back to how this happened after the Civil War and, Reconstruction era, and literally like every time throughout history, beginning with the, birth of this nation to now, this is the pattern that we see. The the biggest call for change that I took away from that book is that pattern persists because of a lack of accountability for people who are doing the racist things, right? The people who are trying to reinstate white supremacy don't get any accountability. They get to stage an insurrection and then get to be pardoned and maybe even run for office and maybe even get elected into office. Like, I don't know, right?
And maybe even go on to commit other crimes.
Just, speaking off the top of my head here. But when we think about when I think about what's happening now, when I think about the role that white women in particular can play in these spaces where they can agitate the white patriarchy, the white patriarchal society that we exist in, figuring out how to challenge and hold the white men and hold people in general accountable for the racism that they are upholding, that is like the pinnacle of interracial sisterhood. It's like, you don't just understand what my experience is and that it's different. You don't just believe that my experience is what it is. You don't just believe that my experience shouldn't be less than yours or anybody else's. You are actively working every single day in ways, even and especially when it means putting yourself on the line, you are challenging the power systems that exist. And that is like real sisterhood, right? It's like not just having your back, it's you're sticking your neck out for me, because you know that if if I win this fight, then you also win this fight, right? There's the quote that says, none of us is free until all of us are free. It's that.
100%. And not isolating ourselves in our little bubbles of privilege and
Yeah.
pretending like everything's gonna be okay. It's not gonna be okay, white women. It is not okay. We already live in the most dangerous country to be a woman among all the developed countries, and it's so much worse for Black women. And this is exactly what patriarchy has done for 400 years to pit us against each other
Yeah.
and to to reward white women for punishing black women. And
Yeah.
I would add, the reason why white women freeze, that is our trauma response.
Mm,
That is our intergenerational trauma, and also why relationships between black women and white women are so fraught is because when you and I are chatting together, it's not just the two of us in the conversation, right? It's you, your ancestors, everything they
yeah.
experienced from my ancestors, and me and my ancestors, and everything we did to your ancestors. So we have a lot of healing work
Mm,
that we need to do in order to show up. And as you were saying, be comfortable, because if we're uncomfortable in the interaction, it's not it's not going to go well. And so
no.
then we tend to just avoid. We just
Yeah.
check out.
Yeah.
And because we're in a naturally occurring all white social circle anyway, like what is the incentive? So
Yeah.
I here's the invitation, white women, break out. Break out of the all white social circle. Join. I have a group coaching program for white women, SOS, Spirit of Sisterhood, where we do this work of really understanding uh, ourselves, developing self awareness, understanding our history, understanding the origin of why these interactions are so fraught, and then what we can do to actually do better. And it's not just about how can I put it? It's also about finding a spiritual home. It's about finding joy in this work. I'm
Mm.
not about guilting and shaming and feeling terrible about being a white woman. I'm about how do we build beloved community among all women. That is what I'm trying to do over here.
Yeah. Beloved community indeed.
Yes. So thank you so much, Dr. Carter. I am so grateful to you for writing this book. It is you're such an excellent writer, storyteller, and the same way as Dr. Carter was talking about, she learned about that she had white body privilege from reading this article by a fat person who was having difficulty traveling. She Every chapter is like that. I wanted to learn the violin and it was really hard, but I stayed with it. This is called growth mindset. Like it makes it all of these analogies makes it really a great, great book and very accessible.
Thank you so much, and thank you for helping to platform me to talk about this and, using your privilege, your space to bring me in and to have this conversation. So yeah, I really appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure. And yes, anybody find me on the internet. I am everywhere, and especially I'm at evelynrcarter.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
Please
you.
get this book, share it, check it out from the library. And I posted also the link to schedule a one-on-one with me if you want to get on my calendar. And to the next Interracial Sisterhood event, May 18th in Sausalito. It's going to be extraordinary. So I'm just so honored for you to have joined us. This has been such a rich conversation.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much, Karen.
Okay. Bye now. Oh, yes. And thank you to everybody who tuned in as well and for your thoughtful comments and questions.